The old violin case sat in the corner of Karolina Martinez's bedroom, its black leather worn smooth from years of use. Every morning at 6 o'clock, she would open it carefully and lift out the instrument that had become her best friend. Violin was not expensive or fancy, but it sang beautifully in her hands. Karolina was 17 years old and different from most students at Lincoln High School. While other teenagers spent their free time at the mall or watching videos on their phones, she practiced violin for 3 hours every day. Her calloused fingertips and the permanent red mark on her neck from the chin rest told the story of countless hours spent making music. The Martinez family lived in a small house on Maple Street. The paint was peeling from the walls in the kitchen. Faucet dripped constantly, but it was filled with love and the sound of Karolina's violin. Her father, Carlos, worked at the Johnson Metal Factory from 7 in the morning until 7 at night. His hands were rough and stained with oil, but they were gentle when he helped Karolina tune her violin strings. Maria Martinez. Karolina's mother cleaned offices downtown. She left the house before sunrise and came home tired, but she always asked to hear her daughter play. Sometimes she would sit in the old blue chair in the living room and close her eyes while Karolina practiced. Tears would roll down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from the beauty of the music her daughter created. Money was always tight in the Martinez household. Carlos and Maria worked hard just to pay for rent, food, and bills. When Karolina started taking violin lessons 3 years ago, Carlos picked up extra shifts on weekends. He never complained, even when his back ached and his feet were sore. He would tell his wife, "Our daughter has a gift from God. We must help her use it." Mrs. Helen Brooks was the music teacher at Lincoln High School. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes who had been teaching for 30 years. She noticed Karolina's talent during the first week of school when she heard her play a simple scale. Most students struggled to hold the violin correctly, but Karolina made it look easy and natural. After class that day, Mrs. Brooks asked Karolina to stay behind. She was nervous, thinking she had done something wrong. But Mrs. Brooks smiled and said, "How long have you been playing the violin?" 3 years, Karolina answered quietly. Mrs. Brooks shook her head in amazement. "Most students need 5 or 6 years to play like you do. You have something special, dear. Have you ever thought about joining the state youth orchestra?" Karolina's eyes grew wide. She had heard about the state youth orchestra, but never imagined she could be good enough to join. Only the very best young musicians were accepted, and they performed in big concert halls with hundreds of people watching. "I don't think I'm good enough," Karolina said, looking down at her shoes. Mrs. Brooks walked over to the piano and played a difficult melody. "Can you play this by ear?" she asked. Karolina listened carefully, then lifted her violin and played the melody perfectly. Mrs. Brooks played it again, but this time with more complex harmonies. Again, Karolina played along without missing a note. "My dear girl," Mrs. Brooks said softly, "you are not just good enough. You are extraordinary." That afternoon, Karolina walked home slowly, thinking about what her teacher had said. The state youth orchestra auditions were in 2 months. She would need to prepare to difficult pieces and perform them in front of judges who had heard thousands of young musicians. When she got home, her parents were sitting at the kitchen table looking at bills. Carlos had dark circles under his eyes and Maria looked worried. Karolina almost decided not to tell them about the audition. They had enough problems without her adding more stress. But as she practiced that evening, playing a beautiful piece by Bach, her parents stopped. What they were doing to listen. When she finished, Carlos wiped his eyes and said, "Mia, when you play, I forget about everything else. The music takes away all my worries." Maria nodded and added, "You sound like the angels singing." That night, Karolina told her parents about the state youth orchestra audition. She expected them to say it was too expensive or too difficult. Carlos put his arm around her and said, "We will find a way. If this is your dream, then it is our dream too." The next few weeks were hard for the Martinez family. Carlos worked even more extra shifts, and Maria took on an additional cleaning job on Sundays. They ate simple meals and turned off lights to save money on electricity. But every evening, Karolina's violin filled their small house with beautiful Music. Mrs. Brooks gave Karolina extra lessons after school without charging money. She helped her choose the perfect pieces for the audition and taught her how to perform in front of people without getting nervous. The key, she said, is to forget about the audience and just tell your story through the music. Karolina practiced the 2 audition pieces until she could play them in her sleep. One was a fast, technical piece that showed off her skill. The other was slow and emotional, allowing her to express the deep feelings in her heart. Every note had to be perfect. 3 weeks before the audition, something unexpected happened. The school announced that they would be having their annual talent show, and the winner would receive a small scholarship. More importantly, talent scouts from the prestigious Riverside Music Academy would be attending to look for promising young musicians. Karolina's heart raced when she heard the news. This could be another chance to show her talent and maybe earn more opportunities. But it also meant more pressure and more competition. That evening, she practiced in her bedroom. She could hear her parents talking quietly in the kitchen. They were discussing whether they had enough money for gas to drive to the state audition. Karolina realized that her dream was costing her family more than they could afford. She closed her violin case and made a decision. She would enter the school talent show and do everything she could to win. If she impressed the talent scouts, maybe they would help her find a way to continue her music education without putting such a burden on her parents as she fell asleep that night. Karolina dreamed of playing violin on a big stage with bright lights and hundreds of people applauding. She did not know that very soon this dream would become real in a way she never expected. The next morning at Lincoln High School, Karolina walked to the main office to sign up for the talent show. Her hands shook a little as she wrote her name on the list. She was the only student who put down classical violin as her performance type. All the other entries were singing, dancing, or playing guitar. As she walked down the hallway, she heard someone laughing loudly behind her. Ashley Turner, one of the most popular girls in school, was standing with her group of friends near the lockers. Ashley had perfect blonde hair and always wore expensive clothes. She was known for being mean to students who were different. "Did you see what Karolina wrote on the talent show list?" Ashley said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Classical? Violin? Who wants to listen to that boring old music?" Her friend Madison giggled and said, "I bet half the audience will fall asleep. Why doesn't she just play something normal like everyone else?" Karolina felt her face turn red. She walked faster, trying to get away from their voices, but Ashley called out to her, "Hey Karolina, you really going to play that weird music at the talent show? Don't you know that nobody our age likes classical music? You're going to embarrass yourself." Karolina stopped walking and turned around. Her heart was beating fast, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "Music is music," she said quietly. "Just because it's old doesn't mean it's not good." Ashley rolled her eyes. "Whatever. Just don't blame me when everyone walks out during your performance." For the rest of the day, Karolina could not focus on her classes. Ashley's words kept playing in her head. Maybe she was right. The classical music was too old-fashioned for a high school talent show. Modern and popular. During lunch, she sat alone in the music room instead of going to the cafeteria. Mrs. Brooks found her there, staring at her violin case. "What's wrong, dear?" Mrs. Brooks asked. Sitting down next to her, Karolina told her about what Ashley had said. Mrs. Brooks listened carefully and then sighed. "I'm sorry that happened to you. Some people don't understand that all music has value, whether it's new or hundreds of years old." "But what if she's right?" Karolina asked. "What if people really don't want to hear classical music? What if I make a fool of myself?" Mrs. Brooks was quiet for a moment, and she said, "Let me tell you something. When I was your age, I played piano in a talent show. I chose a classical piece by Chopin. My friends told me I was crazy, that I should play something from the radio instead. But I played that Chopin piece anyway, and it changed my life." A music teacher from the local college was in the audience that night. She offered me a scholarship because of that performance. Karolina looked up with interest. "Really? Really?" Sometimes the best thing you can do is stay true to what you love, even when others don't understand it. But Mrs. Brooks' story didn't make Karolina feel completely better. Over the next few days, more students made comments about her choice. In math class, Jake Wilson whispered to his friend, "I heard Karolina is going to play violin at the talent show. That's so weird." Even some teachers seemed doubtful. Mr. Pete Collins, who taught history, heard about her performance and said, "I hope you have a backup plan, Karolina." Classical music might not connect with a young audience. The worst part came when Karolina overheard two mothers talking at the grocery store where she worked part-time on weekends. They were discussing the talent show, and one said, "I heard one girl is going to play classical violin. I feel sorry for her. She's going to look so out of place with all the modern acts." That night, Karolina sat in her bedroom with her violin on her lap, but she didn't play. She stared at the ceiling and wondered if she was making a huge mistake. The talent scouts from Riverside Music Academy would be there. If she embarrassed herself, they might never take her seriously again. Her mother knocked on the door and came in. "Mia, why aren't you practicing tonight? I was waiting to hear your beautiful music." "Maybe I should quit the talent show," Karolina said. "Everyone thinks classical music is boring." "Maybe they're right." Maria sat on the bed next to her daughter. "When I was a little girl in Mexico, my grandmother used to tell me a story. There was once a little bird who could sing the most beautiful songs. But all the other birds made fun of her because her songs were different from theirs. So she tried to sing like them instead. But when she sang their songs, her voice was just ordinary. It wasn't until she went back to singing her own songs that she realized her gift was special because it was different." Karolina smiled a little. "You're saying I should be like the little bird? I'm saying you should be like yourself? Your music is beautiful because it comes from your heart. Don't let other people tell you what your heart should feel." The next day at school, things got worse. During lunch, Ashley Turner stood up in the cafeteria and announced loudly, "Don't forget to bring coffee to the talent show next Friday. You'll need it to stay awake during Karolina's boring violin performance." Many students laughed, and Karolina felt like she wanted to disappear. But then something unexpected happened. Emma Rodriguez, a quiet girl from her English class, stood up and said, "I think it's cool that Karolina is doing something different. At least she's brave enough to try." A few other students nodded in agreement, but most just went back to eating their lunch. Karolina was grateful for Emma's support, but she still felt outnumbered. That afternoon, Mrs. Brooks pulled her aside after music class. "I have some news that might interest you," she said. "I spoke with the talent scouts from Riverside Music Academy. They specifically asked if any students would be performing classical music. They said they're excited to hear something different from the usual pop songs and dance numbers." Karolina's eyes widened. "Really? They want to hear classical music?" They said that's exactly what they're looking for. Young people who can appreciate and perform the great works of classical composers. It shows depth and serious musical training. The first time in days, Karolina felt a spark of hope. Maybe Ashley and the others were wrong. Maybe there were people who would appreciate her music after all. But as she walked home that day, the doubts crept back in. What if Mrs. Brooks was just trying to make her feel better? What if the talent scouts changed their minds when they actually heard her play? What if she froze up on stage in front of all those people? That evening, as her father came home from work, tired and covered in grease from the factory, Karolina made a decision. She would not quit the talent show. Her parents had sacrificed too much for her music lessons. Mrs. Brooks had spent extra time helping her. She owed it to them, and to herself to at least try. She opened her violin case and began to practice. As the music filled the small house, she felt some of her confidence returning. Tomorrow, she would start preparing for the performance of her life. 2 weeks before the talent show, Karolina sat in the music room after school with Mrs. Brooks. On the piano were sheets of music for different violin pieces. Some were fast and exciting, others were slow and gentle. Karolina had to choose which piece would be perfect for her performance. "What about this one?" Mrs. Brooks suggested, pointing to a piece by Mozart. "It's cheerful and not too difficult. The audience would probably like it." Karolina looked at the music but shook her head. "It doesn't feel right," she said. I want to play something that means something to me, not just something that's safe." Mrs. Brooks smiled. She had been hoping Karolina would say that. "Then what piece speaks to your heart?" Karolina was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "There's a piece I learned last year, called my Immortal, but arranged for violin. I've never played it for anyone except my family. It reminds me of my grandmother Rosa. Tell me about your grandmother, Mrs. Brooks said gently. Karolina's eyes filled with tears. She died last year from cancer. She lived with us for 2 months. Before she passed away, every evening she would ask me to play violin for her. She said my music was like medicine for her pain. The last song I played for her was this arrangement of my Immortal. She died 2 days later. Mrs. Brooks reached over and squeezed Karolina's hand. That sounds like the perfect piece for you to play. Music that comes from personal experience is always the most powerful. But it's so sad, Karolina worried. What if it makes people uncomfortable? What if they think it's too emotional for a talent show? The best music makes people feel something, Mrs. Brooks replied. If you can, make the audience feel what you felt when you played for your grandmother. Then you will have given them a gift. That night, Karolina went home and told her parents about her choice. When she explained why she wanted to play my Immortal, her father Carlos wiped his eyes with his rough hands. Abuela Rosa would be so proud, he said. Always said you had her gift for music. She could make people cry just by humming. Maria nodded. I remember when Mama lived with us. Even when she was in so much pain, your music would make her smile. If you play that song with the same love you played it for her, everyone will feel it. From that day forward, Karolina practiced my Immortal every spare moment she had. Played it before school, during lunch, and late into the evening. The melody was haunting and beautiful, but it required perfect control of the bow and precise finger placement to make it sound right. Mrs. Brooks stayed after school every day to help her. They worked on the technical parts first, making sure every note was clean and clear. Then they focused on the emotional expression. Don't just play the notes, Mrs. Brooks would say. Tell the story of your grandmother through the music. Mr. Frank Williams, the school janitor, often heard Karolina practicing as he cleaned the hallways. One evening, he knocked on the music room door and poked his head in. I hope you don't mind me saying, he said shyly, but that music you're playing is the most beautiful thing I've heard in my 30 years working at this school. It gives me goosebumps every time. Karolina blushed. Thank you, Mr. Williams. That means a lot. My wife passed away 3 years ago, he continued. When I hear you play that song, it reminds me of her. Music like that is a gift, young lady. Don't let anyone tell you different. This word spread around school about what piece Karolina had chosen. Reactions were mixed. Some students were curious because they had heard the original song on the radio. Others, especially Ashley Turner and her friends, made more mean comments. Great, Ashley said loudly in the hallway. Oh, she's going to make everyone cry at the talent show. How depressing. But other students began to show interest. Emma Rodriguez approached Karolina at lunch and said, I heard you're playing a really emotional piece. I think that's brave. Most people are too scared to show real feelings. Even some teachers started to change their minds. Mr. Pete Collins, who had been doubtful before, heard Karolina practicing one afternoon and stopped to listen. Later, he found her in the hallway. I owe you an apology, he said. I heard you playing today, and I was wrong to question your choice. That was incredibly moving. Dr. Linda Parker, the school principal, also heard Karolina practicing. She called her into the office, and Karolina worried she was in trouble for staying late. So often I wanted to tell you, Dr. Parker said, that I think what you're doing is wonderful. It takes courage to perform something so personal. I believe you're going to surprise a lot of people. As the days passed, Karolina's confidence grew, but so did the pressure. She knew that talent scouts from Riverside Music Academy would be watching. She knew her parents had sacrificed so much to support her music. She knew this might be her one chance to prove herself. Her fingers began to hurt from practicing so much. She developed blisters that she covered with bandages. Her neck was sore from holding the violin for hours. But every time she wanted to quit, she thought about her grandmother Rosa sitting in the old blue chair, smiling as she listened to the music. 1 week before the talent show, something wonderful happened. Mrs. Brooks arranged for Karolina to practice in the school auditorium where the performance would take place. When Karolina walked onto the big stage and looked out at all the empty seats, her heart started racing. It's normal to feel nervous, Mrs. Brooks said from the audience. But remember, when you perform, imagine that you're playing just for your grandmother. Forget about everyone else. Karolina closed her eyes, raised her violin, and began to play. My Immortal. The acoustics in the auditorium were perfect. Her music filled the entire space, echoing off the walls and ceiling. When she finished, she opened her eyes and saw Mrs. Brooks wiping away tears. That was absolutely beautiful, Mrs. Brooks said. If you play like that on the night of the show, you will touch every heart in that audience. That evening, Karolina practiced at home one more time. Her parents sat in the living room listening, and when she finished, the house was completely quiet. Then Carlos stood up and hugged her tightly. Mia, he said, I have never been more proud of anyone in my life. Your grandmother is watching from heaven, and she is smiling. As Karolina went to sleep that night, she felt ready. She had chosen a piece that meant everything to her. She had practiced until it was perfect. She had the support of her family and teachers. Now all she had to do was walk onto that stage and share her heart with the world. The talent show was only 6 days away, and Karolina Martinez was as prepared as she would ever be. The night of the talent show finally arrived. Karolina stood in front of her bedroom mirror, wearing her best dress. It was a simple black dress that her mother had bought at a thrift store and altered to fit perfectly. Her violin case sat on, the bed polished and ready. You look beautiful, Mia, her mother said from the doorway. Maria had taken the evening off from her cleaning job to watch her daughter perform. Carlos had left work early, something he never did, but he said nothing was more important than being there for Karolina. Let me scared, Karolina admitted, her hands shaking as she tried to fix her hair. That's normal, Carlos said, putting his arm around her. Even the greatest musicians get nervous before they perform. But once you start playing, the fear will go away. They drove to Lincoln High School together. The parking lot was packed with cars, and people were walking toward the main entrance carrying flowers and cameras. Karolina felt her stomach flip. As she realized how many people would be watching her, inside the school, the auditorium was buzzing with excitement. Students were running around backstage, practicing their dance moves and warming up their voices. Parents filled the seats, talking loudly and taking pictures. Karolina could see the 2 talent scouts from Riverside Music Academy sitting in the front row. They wore dark suits and had serious expressions on their faces. Mrs. Brooks found Karolina backstage and gave her a gentle hug. How are you feeling, dear? Terrified, Karolina whispered. Good. Mrs. Brooks smiled. That means you care. Remember, you've practiced this piece hundreds of times. Your muscle memory knows exactly what to do. Just trust yourself and play from your heart. The talent show began at 7 o'clock. Dr. Parker walked onto the stage and welcomed everyone. Tonight we have 15 amazing acts from our talented students. Let's give them all our support and encouragement. Karolina was scheduled to perform 11th, which meant she had to wait almost 2 hours before her turn. She sat in a folding chair backstage, holding her violin case and watching the other performances on a small TV monitor. First was a group of girls, performing a pop song with choreographed dancing. The audience clapped and cheered loudly. Next was a boy playing guitar and singing a popular song from the radio. Again, the crowd loved it. As each act performed, Karolina felt more and more nervous. Everyone was doing modern, upbeat performances. The audience was laughing and clapping along. What would they think when she played her slow, emotional piece? Maybe I should have chosen something different, she whispered to Emma Rodriguez, who had come backstage to wish her luck. No way, Emma said firmly. You chose the perfect piece. Trust me, people need to hear something real sometimes, not just the same old stuff. Ashley Turner was performing 9th, right before intermission. She sang a popular song while wearing a sparkly dress and dancing across the stage. The audience went wild, giving her a standing ovation. She came backstage, she looked at Karolina and smirked. Good luck following that, Ashley said. Hope. You brought tissues for the audience. They're going to need them to wipe away their tears of boredom. Karolina felt her confidence crumble. Maybe Ashley was right. Maybe she had made a terrible mistake. During intermission, her parents came backstage to see her. They could tell she was upset. What's wrong, Mia? Maria asked. Everyone is doing such exciting performances, Karolina said. My piece is so different. What if people don't like it? What if they think it's boring? Carlos knelt down in front of his daughter and took her hands in his rough, calloused ones. Listen to me, Karolina. When you were little, you used to ask me why I worked so hard at the factory. I told you it was because I had something important to build. I was building a future for you. Tonight you have something important to build too. You're going to build a bridge between your heart and all those people out there. Your music is that bridge. After intermission, the 10th act performed. It was a comedy routine that had everyone laughing. Then Dr. Parker walked back onto the stage. Our next performer is Karolina Martinez, who will be playing a violin solo. Karolina heard her name and felt like she might faint. This was it. There was no turning back now. She picked up her violin case and walked toward the stage entrance. Mrs. Brooks was waiting there with an encouraging smile. Remember, you're not just playing for the audience. You're playing for your grandmother, Rosa. She's watching over you tonight. Karolina nodded and stepped onto the stage. The bright lights hit her face, and for a moment she couldn't see anything. Then her eyes adjusted, and she could see the packed auditorium. Hundreds of faces were looking at her. Some looked curious, others looked skeptical. She walked to the center of the stage and opened her violin case. The audience fell quiet, but it wasn't the respectful quiet she had hoped for. She could hear people whispering and moving around in their seats. Someone coughed loudly. Karolina lifted her violin and positioned it under her chin. Ouchie! Closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother Rosa sitting in the old blue chair. Smiling and waiting to hear her play, she raised her bow and played the first note. The sound was clear and pure, filling the entire auditorium. The whispering stopped immediately. The second note followed, then the third. The haunting melody of my Immortal began to unfold. As Karolina played, something magical happened. She forgot about the audience, forgot about her nervousness, forgot about Ashley Turner's mean comments. She was no longer standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people. She was back in her living room, playing for her dying grandmother. Every note carried the love she felt for Rosa. Every phrase told the story of their time together. The music spoke of loss and sadness, but also of beautiful memories and eternal love. The audience was completely silent now. Even the youngest children had stopped fidgeting. Parents who had been taking pictures put down their cameras to listen. The talent scouts in the front row leaned forward in their seats. Karolina played the most difficult section of the piece flawlessly. Her fingers danced across the strings while her bow moved with perfect control. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't stop playing. As the piece neared its end, the melody became softer and more tender. Karolina played the final notes with such emotion that it felt like she was saying goodbye to her grandmother all over again. The last note hung in the air for what seemed like forever. Then there was complete silence. Karolina opened her eyes and looked out at the audience. For a terrifying moment, she thought something was wrong. Why wasn't anyone clapping? Had she played badly? Then she saw something that took her breath away. Many people in the audience were crying. Not just her parents, but students, teachers, and strangers. Even some of the teenagers who had seemed bored by classical music were wiping their eyes. The silence stretched on for another few seconds. Then one person started clapping. Then another. Within moments, the entire auditorium erupted in thunderous applause. The applause seemed to go on forever. Karolina stood on the stage, still holding her violin, watching in amazement as the entire auditorium rose to their feet. She had never seen a standing ovation before, and she couldn't believe it was for her. In the front row, the two talent scouts from Riverside Music Academy were clapping enthusiastically. One of them was wiping tears from her eyes. Behind them, Karolina could see her parents crying and clapping so hard their hands must have hurt. Even Ashley Turner was standing and clapping. Her face looked shocked, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. The mean expression she usually wore was gone, replaced by something that looked like respect. Dr. Parker had to come onto the stage to quiet the audience, so the show could continue. That was absolutely incredible, Karolina, she whispered as she passed by. I've never heard anything like that in all my years as principal. Karolina walked off the stage in a daze. Her legs felt weak and her hands were shaking. Mrs. Brooks was waiting in the wings with tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my dear," Mrs. Brooks said, pulling her into a tight hug. "That was the most beautiful performance I've ever heard. You didn't just play music tonight. You touched every soul in that auditorium." The remaining acts had to perform after Karolina, but it was clear that nothing could match what had just happened. The audience was still buzzing with emotion. People kept turning to their neighbors and saying things like, "Did you hear that?" And I've never felt anything like that before. When the talent show ended, Karolina was named the winner. But before Dr. Parker could even announce her name, people were already rushing toward the stage. The talent scouts reached her first. "Martinez," said the woman scout, who introduced herself as Patricia Davis. "I'm the admissions director at Riverside Music Academy. That performance was extraordinary. We would like to offer you a full scholarship to our school, including room and board." Karolina's mouth fell open. "Really? A full scholarship?" "Really?" said the male scout, Mr. Robert Chen. "In my 20 years of talent scouting, I have never heard a high school student play with such emotional maturity. You have a rare gift." Before Karolina could respond, more people surrounded her. Kate Johnson, a reporter from the local newspaper, was taking pictures and asking questions. "How long have you been playing violin? What inspired you to choose that piece? How does it feel to win?" Parents and students were pushing forward to congratulate her. Mr. Frank Williams, the janitor, had tears in his eyes as he shook her hand. "I told you that music was special," he said. "Tonight you proved it to everyone." Even teachers who had doubted her were waiting to speak with her. Mr. Pete Collins apologized again for questioning her choice. "I was completely wrong," he said. "What you did tonight was not just entertainment, it was art." But the moment that meant the most to Karolina was when her parents finally reached her through the crowd. Carlos picked her up and spun her around, something he hadn't done since she was a little girl. "Mia, you made your old papa so proud tonight," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "When you played that song, I felt like Mama Rosa was right. They're with us." Maria hugged her daughter tightly. "You did something very special tonight. You made people feel things they had forgotten they could feel. That's what real music does." As the crowd began to thin out, someone tapped Karolina on the shoulder. She turned around and was surprised to see Ashley Turner standing there. Ashley looked embarrassed and wouldn't meet her eyes at first. "Wait. I need to say something to you," Ashley said quietly. "I was wrong about you. Really wrong. I made fun of your music because I was jealous. I can't do anything as beautiful as what you just did. I'm sorry for being so mean." Karolina was shocked. She had never heard Ashley apologize to anyone before. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "It means a lot. Your music made me think about my grandmother too," Ashley continued. "She died when I was 10, and I still miss her. When you played tonight, I remembered how much she loved me. I haven't thought about that in years." Emma Rodriguez also came over to congratulate her best friend. "I knew you could do it," she said, with a big smile. "You were amazing up there. I recorded part of it on my phone. Should see how quiet everyone got when you started playing." Yes. As the evening wound down, Mrs. Brooks helped Karolina pack up her violin. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Will you accept the scholarship to Riverside Music Academy?" Karolina looked at her parents, who were talking excitedly with the talent scouts. "I think so," she said, "but I'm scared. What if I'm not good enough for a school like that? After tonight, I don't think you need to worry about that, Mrs. R." Brooks laughed. "But remember, no matter how far you go or how famous you become, never forget why you started playing music. It wasn't for the applause or the scholarships. It was because music was in your heart." The next few days were like a whirlwind. The video that Emma had recorded was shared on social media and went viral. Thousands of people watched it and left comments about how much Karolina's performance had moved them. The local newspaper ran a story about her with the headline, "Local Teen's Violin Performance Brings Audience to Tears." 3 different music schools called to offer her scholarships. A local radio station interviewed her. People she had never met stopped her on the street to tell her how much her music had affected them. but the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. An elderly woman named Betty Clark came to Karolina's house a few days after the performance. She explained that she had been at the talent show with her granddaughter. "I lost my husband 6 months ago," Mrs. Clark said with tears in her eyes. "I've been so sad that I stopped listening to music altogether. But when you played that night, something changed inside me. Your music reminded me that even though I lost someone I loved, the beautiful memories will always be with me. Thank you for giving me that gift." A month later, Karolina started classes at Riverside Music Academy. The school was everything she had dreamed of and more. She studied with world-class teachers and performed with other talented young musicians from around the country, but she never forgot the lesson she learned that night at Lincoln High School. The most important thing about music wasn't technical perfection or impressing judges. It was the ability to connect with people's hearts and help them feel something real. Years later, when Karolina became a professional violinist performing in concert halls around the world, she would always remember her grandmother, Rosa, and that magical night when a scared teenager with a second-hand violin showed an entire auditorium the true power of music played from the heart. And whenever she felt nervous before a big performance, she would close her eyes and imagine herself back in that small living room, playing for the woman who first taught her that music was love made audible.